Hello, everybody. This is Ms Moran. So while I'm at the conference, you're in class taking some notes. So make sure there's some good notes. If while we're doing this, you need some more time to write something down, please just raise your hand and be polite and ask for some more time. We can always pause the video and then give you a little bit more time to write stuff down. So that's okay as long as you're polite. So make sure you've got your notebooks open to a new page. You can write the date at the top. This is Unit 7, and we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, we've got 3 vocabulary words today. The first one is legs. Legs. Go ahead and write it down. You can draw this picture, and then we're going to label it. All right, so if we have a triangle and it's an isosceles triangle, okay, then what we can say is the legs, so each of these is a leg, these legs are congruent, and that is a property of an isosceles triangle. Right? The next word is base. Go ahead and write the definition of base in your notebooks, copy this picture, and then we'll go ahead and label the triangle. All right, so here we have triangle ACB or ABC, and we have 2 legs that are congruent, and the base is the non-congruent side of the triangle. So this is the base because it is not congruent to the other 2 sides. The next one is base angles. Base angles. Go ahead and write this definition, and then we'll go ahead and label the picture. Okay, the 2 angles at the base of the triangle are called base angles. So if I know that these 2 sides are congruent, they are the legs, and this at the or on the left-hand side is called the base because it is not congruent, then what we have here is angle A and angle B are called base angles. And these base angles are congruent. So I could state that angle A is congruent to angle B. The third angle is called the angle opposite the base because it is across from the base. So C is called the angle opposite the base. Angle opposite the base. Okay, we're going to have just 3 theorems as we go through this. We had 3 vocabulary words. We're going to have 3 theorems. Base angle theorem. So we know this has to do with our base angles. Go ahead and write the theorem down, and then we'll talk through it. The base angle theorem states if 2 sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides are congruent. So if I know that these 2 sides are congruent, that MR is congruent to RP, then I know automatically that these 2 angles, angle M is congruent to angle P. This is called the base angle theorem. So anytime I see an isosceles triangle marked, that means that the angles, the base angles, are congruent. Okay, now this theorem is going to sound very similar. It is the converse of the base angle theorem. Now the converse means that we got to switch the if and the n. We just switched the parts. So in the last theorem we had if the sides are congruent, then the angles are congruent. Let's read this one. If 2 angles of a triangle are congruent, then the sides opposite those angles are congruent. So this one is different because we're going to start with the angles, and the angles tell us that the sides are congruent. So this one would start if angle W is congruent to angle R, then we know that WN is congruent to RN. So we start with the angles and end with the sides. All right, so this is our last theorem or property for this set of notes. Go ahead and write it down. This one is about equilateral and equiangular triangles. Write those two sentences, draw the picture, and then we'll go ahead and talk about them. Alrighty, if a triangle is equilateral, which means that all sides are congruent, then we know that it's equiangular, which means all angles are congruent. All right, what is different about the second sentence? Well, the second sentence says, if a triangle is equiangular, then it's equilateral. So from these two sentences, we can decide that if they tell us about the sides, then we know about the angles. And if they tell us about the angles, then we know about the sides. So whenever we see a triangle that has all these angles marked congruent, we also know that all of the sides are congruent. Okay, so one more thing before we move on, and that is, what is the measure of each angle inside an equilateral triangle? I'll say it again. What is the measure of each angle inside an equilateral triangle? If you said 60 degrees, you're correct. No matter how small the triangle is or how big the equilateral triangle is, if we know that each angle is exactly the same, then I would take 3 x's in a big triangle, in a medium triangle, in a small triangle, and I would say 3 x's or 3 angles have to equal 180 degrees. And I would divide by 3. Therefore, each angle in an equilateral triangle is 60 degrees, whether it's a big equilateral triangle or a small equilateral triangle. Make sure you know that. All right, we're going to do some examples. So right now we're going to ask that the worksheet get passed out and that everybody is looking at the side that says A. Sorry about that. Okay, so we want to make sure that everybody's looking at the side that says 4.3A. Now, I know that you're going to want to start at the top, but please stay with me because I'm only going to do 3 examples from each side of the worksheet. Once we finish those examples, then you can work on the rest of it. But if you miss my examples, you're not going to know how to do them. So stay with me. Whenever we're ready, go ahead and we're going to start number 8. Okay, so let me draw number 8 on here. You're looking at the triangle, and the directions say, tell which sides and angles are congruent. So based on this markings, I can tell you that AB is congruent to BC. Except we learned something about isosceles triangles and base angles. If we know the sides are congruent, we also know the angles are congruent. So we get the sides and we also get that angle A is congruent to angle C. This is your answer. All right, the next one we're going to do is number 10. So I'm going to draw number 10 and you're going to take a look at it. And this one tells us that the base angles are 50 degrees each. And if those two angles are congruent, then we know that the sides are congruent. So we're going to write it down. Angle R is congruent to angle S, and write down which two sides are congruent. Hopefully you wrote down that RT is congruent to TS. Okay, we're going to try one more from this side. Let's take a look. Oops, I don't want number 3. I wanted number 11. Let's take a look at number 11 from this side. Okay, so I'm going to draw that triangle, and the directions for this one say, find the measure of the variable. Okay, so since I know that these two angles have to be congruent because they are both base angles. Oops, my highlighter never works on the screen. Let's try a different color highlighter maybe. Oh, I know that those two angles are congruent, which means that I can say that x equals 42 degrees. Remember, those can get a little trickier. What if that wasn't just x? What if it was something like x plus 5? So you might have to do a little bit more solving. All right, go ahead and turn your worksheet over, and we're going to try 3 examples from side B. And we're going to start with number 7. And number 7, it kind of looks just like what we were working on, except it says 2x degrees and 32, and it told us that these are 10. What type of triangle is it? It's an isosceles triangle. And an isosceles triangle, if these two sides are congruent, then we know that these two angles are congruent. So we can make 2x equal 32, and we can find x by dividing by 2. So x equals 16. 2 more to go. Number 8 on this page. Number 8, draw it like this. We'll write x plus 10 and 45. They tell us that these two sides are congruent. And if those two sides are congruent, then these two angles are congruent. So we can make an equation. I would subtract 10, and we would say that x equals 35. Awesome. Next one. We're going to try number 14. The directions on number 14 say find the measure of angle A. It tells us that these two sides are congruent and that angle B is 72 degrees. If you write down that angle A is 72 degrees, then you're moving too fast. Because which angle is congruent to angle B? Angle C. So that means there's another 72 degrees over there. So we have to use what we remember from yesterday, and that is that all 3 angles have to add up to 180 degrees. So we're going to do a little bit of addition here. Ricardo, you can use subtraction. And we're going to subtract these numbers until we figure out what angle A is. Angle A, equals 36 degrees. That's our answer. All right, so your homework is to complete the rest of the problems on both sides of this worksheet. Bring it to class tomorrow, and then I have an answer key for the sub to show you tomorrow. And then we will move on to one more section without me. You guys are probably doing a fabulous job. Thank you very much for being great students today. I never had to ask anyone to stop talking. This was a good day. All right, miss you guys, and I will see you on Monday.